Hey, it's Aurelius here. Um, Reading another article. I think it's fun to learn new things and kind of go over new things with you guys. And I thought, what better than to review the links between age and extremism by the American Society on Aging. The reason why I would even think of looking these things up is because a lot of people who tend to be more extreme politically, especially on the right side of things, tend to be much older. You'd see that trend with people who pretty much exclusively watch Fox News and, etc. But I'd like to go over a source that really details about this, or really goes in detail about this. And yeah, to just bring up some data and figures as to why old people are out of touch and why you kind of can say, okay, boomer in a lot of instances. All right, let me read this. So, in the 2 years since a mob of rioters stormed the United States Capitol building in an attempt to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election, nearly 1,000 people have been charged with federal crimes that range from misdemeanor trespassing to assault to seditious conspiracy. The Capitol defendants, who have come from all parts of the country, are an eclectic mix of characters, including fringe conspiracy theorists, social media influencers, members of organized extremist groups, local politicians, and people who had never organized politically prior to January 6th. But despite the diversity in their backgrounds and levels of political engagement, the Capitol riot defendants are remarkably similar in one key, but one overlooked trait. They are overwhelmingly older Americans. The statistics on the January 6th insurrection made it clear that the riot was not the result of a youth movement. The average Capitol defendant was nearly 42 years old on the day the riot occurred. Some of the most high-profile cases consist of individuals who have been prepping for retirement rather than insurrection. For instance, Stuart Rhodes, the leader of the anti-government Oath Keepers militia, who was recently convicted of seditious conspiracy, was 55 years old on January 6th, the stiffest penalty handed down to a rioter thus far has been 10 years in prison for assaulting Capitol Police. This was given to a 56-year-old former officer of the New York Police Department. The older person persecuted or prosecuted for participating in the events of January 6th is an 81-year-old Army veteran from Pennsylvania. What explains why some older individuals in the United States have gravitated towards violent extremism? Now, this is what intrigues me the most. Before I go on and read, I think it's insane how the average age of the Capitol rioters was 42 years old. These are the people who have been convicted. These are not the people who stood outside of that Capitol and still lawfully protested. This is talking about the types of people who have done the crimes and who are doing the time, and these people don't tend to have much time left. So I'd really want to know what drives this counterintuitive action. Because realistically, if I'm older, I would not want to lose any more time on stupid shit like riding the Capitol illegally. Illegally. This is not peaceful. This was not peaceful protests for at least the people who are cited in this. While the sheer size of the Capitol riot makes it an outlier as far as extremist crimes go, the fact that middle-aged and older individuals participated in it does not. My team at the University of Maryland has collected data on more than 3,200 individuals who have committed crimes in the United States since the 1950s. We have found that the typical extremist offender is often older than the person might assume. According to our data, the average offender is nearly 35 years old when they commit their first politically motivated crime. The actions of the first offense is even higher from some ideological groups or subgroups, such as far-right anti-government extremists who are typically in their 40s, when they first offend. Moreover, extremist activities of older people are not limited to not violent people. Nearly 40% of violent extremist offenders in the United States are ages 35 or older. Even more concerning, one-third of the successful mass casualty terrorist attacks that have occurred in the United States since 1990, including horrific assault on the Tree of Synagogue in 2018, was committed by offenders older than the age of 40. I have no idea of the Tree of Synagogue thing. That's probably going to be the next thing we're going to read about. Next thing I'm going to fucking read up on. Let me just copy that and paste it. So yeah, I'm gonna search that and get some more details on that. The age crime curve does not pertain to extremism. So this is another thing that I was thinking while I was reading this. I was like, obviously younger people commit more crimes, especially murder, especially all these other things, because their hormones are raging and all this yada yada yada. So it only makes sense for older people to do it based upon the belief that they're being lied to by governments and really anything along the lines of that. I mean, it makes sense for resentment towards the system that's been failing them to build up over time, and then they believe that their solutions will solve the problems, and so violence. The radicalization of older individuals and their participation in events like the Capitol riot surprises many observers because it is generally assumed that political violence, like other forms of crime, is an activity predominated by young people. One of the most consistent and robust findings in the field of developmental criminology is the age crime curve, which suggests that the risk of criminality is higher in adolescence and then drops off significantly in early adulthood. While the causes of this effect are debated, some scholars argue that by going to college, entering the workforce, getting married, and having children, young adults form pro-social bonds to their communities that steer them away from crime and delinquency. The correlation between youth and crime has been replicated across time, place, and multiple offense types, making the prevalence of middle-aged adults in the United States extremist offender population perplexing. What explains why some older individuals in the United States have gravitated towards violent extremism? This is These are the perfect questions to be asking as well. I love this article. Studies that have investigated the relationships between age and political violence have almost exclusively focused on young people. But my team's data suggests that the radicalization of older adults is both tied is tied to both ideational and martial factors. I don't know if I read that right. What the hell? I'm about to get me some vocab, boy. Additional. Oh, okay. Got it. Okay. The highest concentration of middle-aged and older extremist offenders in the United States is in groups and movements that compromise the extremist far right. Regardless of how they radicalize, research shows that extremist offenders are likely to encounter significant obstacles to disengaging from extremism. This makes sense. A lot of extremists are very cult-like. You would notice if you were in any of those spaces, if you were to say anything against if you were to entertain any argument against an extremist, they would freak out and it would be a fear response. In the same way that I say homophobic people experience fear responses, it's the same thing, where it's like you're having a fight response. So clearly you are afraid. You can say whatever you want, but that is a fear response. And that's what tends to be had whenever their ideas are questioned. All right. So this data, which is made up of white supremacists and nativist groups, misogynists and anti-government militias, sovereign citizens and Christian nationalists, recruits by weaponing political discourse, casting common political debates as battles of good versus evil for the future of the country. These groups tend to craft extremist narratives around the idea around issues that have publicly shown to resonate more with older Americans, such as immigration policy, public education, health, and religion. In recent years, extremists and their mainstream supporters have been so successful in poisoning the public debate with disinformation and conspiracy theories that Americans are increasingly basing their voting decisions on falsehoods. For example, a recent study shows an astonishing 25% of Republican voters, who tend to be older Americans, report believing in the QAnon conspiracy theory. That's insane. I thought that number was a little lower. It would be insane if it was 10%. But 25%, one fourth of all Republican voters believe in QAnon. That's unhinged. That is beyond mentally unhinged. The bizarre claim that the president, or the former president, Donald Trump, and his military allies are secretly fighting a cabal of Democrats, Hollywood celebrities, and global elites who are engaged in Satan worshipping and child sex trafficking. Of course, extremist narratives like QAnon do not simply disappear once votes have been cast. We all witnessed on January 6th, those who are upset with the outcome of the election can use the disinformation spread by extremists as justification to mobilize to violence. Ugh. Freaking notifications. They are the bane of my existence because I'm reading something and I see this. Oh, like, stop. While the vast majority of people who care about issues like immigration and health policy will not radicalize or join violent groups, extremists know that if they insert enough vitriol into political discourse, some will. And all it takes is a few dedicated adherts to have a remarkable impact on the public's perceptions of how their safety and the health of our democracy. Oh, of their safety, not about their safety. Ugh. Okay, so I'm looking at this chart, profiles of radicalization in the United States. Age of criminal offense. This is average. So, 37.3 far-right offenders. So this is age, this is not numbers. 29.8 for far-left offenders, and 28.7 jihadist offenders. Married far-right extremists, 36.1. Married far-left offenders, 18.8%. Married jihadist offenders, 34.5%. Low education, no college experience. The percent of far-right offenders in this category is 47.1%. Far-left offenders, 27.8%. Jihadist offenders, 41.9%. So here's what I'm noticing. This is a trend so far that I'm reading with far-left offenders, is they tend to have lower percentages of political extremist violence once they're married and they're educated. With far-right people, 40, or not even educated, like low education, sorry. Unemployed, 21% far-right offenders, 19.2% far-left offenders, 23.8% jihadist offenders. Criminal history, 48% far-right offenders, 32.2 far-left offenders, 32.5 jihadist offenders. Substance use disorder, 21.9% far-right offenders, 13.4 far-left offenders, 12.1 jihadist offenders. Evidence of mental illness, 20.7 far-right offenders, 12.9% far-left offenders, and 18% jihadist offenders. So a lot of these figures can have a lot of conclusions assumed off of it, and I will definitely look into a few of them that I'm thinking about right now. The first thing that I'm thinking about is evidence of mental illness is much, much higher for far-right offenders, and low education of like far-right offenders are much higher as well. So what I would assume from there is It seems that a lot of political extremists on the right tend to do two things: not be very educated and deny their mental health. I mean, for the most part, you can have mental illnesses and not offend. I don't think it's I don't think it's a good enough excuse to say, "Oh, I'm mentally ill, therefore I offend," unless it's something very morbid. And I'm thinking, yeah, it makes sense because a lot of people undermine the value of psychology and psychology degrees, and on the personal level, it doesn't really help you that much in comparison to other majors. I'll admit that. Where our faith in mental health and mental health professionals is so low that realistically, everyone's not really, everyone who really needs therapy is not really getting it. Perhaps more important than ideational causes, the radicalization of the older offenders might reflect the fact that many of them have experience in pro-social bonds associated with aging significantly lower than non-extremists. The failure to achieve important life course benchmarks, such as finding a romantic partner, establishing a career, can produce grievances that fuels one's individual radicalization. There is initial evidence to support his view, at least in US context. For instance, the average US offender associated with far right extremism is nearly 38 years old, 36% of them married, nearly half of them with no college experience, and almost 21% of them are unemployed. Furthermore, older offenders associated with extremist right have relatively high rates of criminal risk factors that can offset or prevent achievement of positive life goals. Approximately 50% of far right offenders in the United States have criminal histories that have been that have that begin before they have been radicalized. Nearly a quarter have documented substance abuse disorders, and 20% of them have diagnosed mental illness. So, I mean, that's what happens when you do drugs and you don't take care of your mental health. It is what it is. Caught in the vicious cycle. Regardless of how they radicalize, research shows that extremist offenders are likely to encounter significant obstacles to disengaging from extremism, especially if they spend any amount of time in prison. The community stigma associated with being an extremist offender can limit future employment opportunities, which is especially concerning for individuals whose initial radicalization was tied to their inability to find a steady and meaningful job. Even those who have established careers prior to radicalization can experience negative financial effects that is often accompany a record of extremist crime. Many January 6th defendants, for example, report losing their jobs and having difficulty finding new ones because of their participation in the riot. The financial strain that can accompany disengagement might impact older offenders especially hard. Individuals confronted by the financial pressures of preparing for retirement, paying for their kids' college education, or caring for their older parents can often least afford to experience financial downturns. In addition to economic hardships, studies indicate that increased anxiety and uncertainty that accompanies disengagement from extremists can trigger issues of substance abuse and related mental health concerns. Unfortunately, unlike its European counterparts, the United States has no national program to help people overcome these challenges and leave extremism, meaning that there are many individuals attempting to disengage that do not have the support necessary to succeed. This is huge. This is huge because the United States is very lazy with their social safety nets and how they set up, you know, their economy and how they help out certain groups. The fact is that a lot of these people can't get back on their feet and recover because they have no social programs to do it. They have no steady income after this happens. The moment you ruin your life like this is the moment that it's just over and the cord is cut. So yes, I would say it. I think that it's actually worthwhile to try to de-radicalize people from the farther right. If this means help them get their life together and get a job, then sure, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with them re-entering society, so long as we can make these things work. We don't need extremism running this country. We don't need it to be like Poland, where drugs are just legal, and then there are no social programs to help people with their addictions. That's a problem. Studies have found that people who struggle during the disengagement process are more likely to re engage with extremism at some point in the future or reoffend by committing non ideological crimes, which have already been the case for some Capitol rioters. The events of January 6th were part of a larger phenomenon of mass radicalization that has spread throughout the United States populace, including to those who should have been too busy with work and family obligations to consider engaging in political violence. Yeah, this makes sense, and it's been fueled by mainstream views that were the exclusive domain of fringe groups. No longer are radicalizing narratives limited to the dark corners of the internet that only young people visit. Rather, they can be found on cable news, talk radio, mainstream social sites that are viewed frequently by young and old people alike. Given the older Americans tend to vote at much higher rates than younger people, the spread of extremism to the mainstream means that there's a good chance that our electoral politics will continue to be dominated by disinformation, conspiracy theories, and an unwillingness to compromise. It also means that we should expect a small subset of older Americans to continue to radicalize to the point where they are committing acts of violence, sometimes with devastating consequences. Far more attention needs to be paid between the relationship of age and extremism in the United States, especially when it comes to devising effective extremism prevention programs. A safer America can only be achieved by stopping the spread of extremism across all age cohorts and will require us to shed the misguided belief that only young people are prone to violence. This is written by Michael Jensen, is a senior researcher at the National, I can't even pronounce that word, of the study of terrorism and response to terrorism, START, at the University of Maryland in College Park, where he leads the profiles of individual radicalization in the United States project, which is a first of its kind database on radicalization characteristics of U.S. extremists. So yeah, this is a very interesting read. I thought about that and I wanted to search it because a lot of people are like, oh, old people are the reason why this, and this happens. And I'm like, okay, why? So I kind of searched this. I will link what I just read in the description. I think my rating is probably not the best, but it is what it is. And I think it's fun for me to relay this information. A lot of people just kind of don't want to read at all. I can't blame them. Reading kind of sucks. It's a skill to develop. Clearly, as you can tell, my reading skills are mid. They're mid. I'll admit it. Like my reading is fucking mid. It's probably not mid by United States standards because the United States average reading level is sixth grade, so it's definitely not that level of mid. Okay, I've got at least a ninth grade reading level. I'll admit it. Okay, but that's the thing is I'm supposed to be the retard here because I have autism and ADHD and all that stuff. I got diagnosed at a young age though, and I got years of speech therapy and stuff, so it's not as bad of a burden. But yeah, apparently I'm the retard. And I mean, I'm trying to learn new things either way. So, like, subscribe, share the video. Share the video to an older person that might be more prone to extremism. Tell them, hey, I care about you. Don't fall for this. We don't need you in jail. You got barely any years left. You kind of don't need to spend them rotting away. You kind of need to spend them with the people you care about. And I'll see y'all later.